Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Let's welcome today's speaker, Melody.
Good morning. My name is Melody, and I'm an alcoholic and an addict. I really didn't want to come this morning at all. Any of you feel that way? And thank God Scott told me to be here a half an hour before I needed to, because that took by my still alcoholic tendency to be late. So I was able to be late and still be on time. And he told me to, it always gets me. I got sober by the grace of God.
I want to smack you with it.
In 1973, and when people talk about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, I keep wanting to say, well, which time? Because there's been a lot of junctures in my sobriety, junctures that, as one of the women who accepted a chip or a cake today said, if I had known my life was going to be like this, I probably wouldn't have kept coming back. And now I realize why I stayed drunk as long as I did and using drugs, because at some level, I think I knew what was coming. The reality is that life is going to be life. And this is a solutions meeting, and I want to talk about the three most important solutions I've found, four most important solutions. The number one solution I've found is the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can stay sober without making it to a meeting if I can't get to the meeting, if I'm sick. I can stay sober without going out to coffee with other addicts. I cannot stay sober without working the steps. And I don't just mean one time, a big time through. I mean as daily tools for living and getting through the things that come my way. And the magic and the beauty of the steps is if I take just 1 inch of a movement towards a step, it'll go a mile to meet me and to work. I didn't find the steps found me. When I was listening to the two other principles that are solutions, number one is gratitude. And that doesn't just mean gratitude for the good things, because a chimpanzee can be grateful, for the good things he gets. But grateful for the whole package that we call life. And the fourth solution is remembering that there but for the grace of God. Because for many years of my life, I was a person they pointed to and said, there but for the grace of God, go I. I started drinking when I was 12 years old. I was an addict, an alcoholic by the time I was 13. I lived in a family that didn't work, not just mildly dysfunctional, but I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, it was number 12 in dysfunction. I drank not because I had a good time, not because it was a party, not because it felt fun, because it made me feel normal. I didn't have a base of feeling normal that was good unless I was drinking. By the time I was 13, I had lost control of what I drank, how much I drank, and what I did when I drank. And that, to me, is the criteria for being an alcoholic. The problem was that was in the old days, and we didn't know that kids that went to Christian high schools and were straight-A students and looked like nerds could be alcoholics or addicts. We didn't know that happened then. and there weren't any solutions for them at that time. When I turned 19, I made a life-changing decision. I could see that I lost control when I drank. I could see that my behaviors resulted in terrible, terrible things happening. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to change. I'm only going to do drugs from here on out. I lived in Minnesota then, and unfortunately, it was very hard to get good drugs in Minnesota. But by the time they reached there, they had been cut so much, you couldn't get well, much less high. So it takes a lot of creativity and intelligence to be an addict. And so it didn't take long to realize that there were subcultures in the alcoholic and addiction world, and that if I, as a woman, wanted to really get high, I needed to find a relationship where the man was a drugstore robber, which I did. And so, unlike a lot of drug addicts that say, well, I didn't have any money, I didn't have any drugs, I always had a doctor's bag full of drugs, and I had a lot of money, and there, but for the grace of God, I was arrested before I turned 24, and I was given an option. You know, I reached that point where I could leave the house, the car would be working fine, a taillight would go out, I'd get stopped by the police, they'd ask me to get out of the car, I would, drugs would fall out of my pocket, and I'd end up in county jail. And then they'd look at my record and see where I'd went to school and the grades I had, and I'd call my ever-famous, rest in peace, mother, codependent, and she'd come to my rescue with a bevy of attorneys, and the judge would let me off. And usually, as it got worse, though, my sentence became going to live with my mother, which was worse than any jail they could put me in. Finally, in 1973, I was standing before a judge, and he said, I don't care where you went to school, I don't care what kind of grades you got, I don't care how many attorneys your mother has here, do you know that you're responsible for your own behavior? And I lied and said yes, but I didn't know that I was. I thought that if people didn't love me, if I didn't get good things, if the things that happened to other people didn't happen to me, and if the things that happened to me weren't happening to other people, that I deserved to get high. I got a free pass. Well, the thing was, I didn't get a free pass. My behavior had consequences, and it had led me to standing before this judge, who, thank God, had the intelligence to say, you have a choice. You can go to prison for 0 to 5 years, or you can go to treatment for as long as it takes. And I had to think about that. I did, because he was asking me to give up the only normal, the only good feelings I had ever known. But then the addict kicked in, and I thought, well, I can get to treatment, and I'll meet someone else that's an addict, and I'll be able to get high, and I'll be able to manipulate my way out of there, so I chose treatment. About 3 or 4 months into treatment, and when he said as long as it takes, he wasn't kidding, I was there for 8 months. I was sitting out on the lawn. A couple days earlier, my probation officer had come up to visit me, and I had really scored the night before. To me, scoring in treatment meant I had a handful of amphetamines. And I thought, well, I'll wait till after my visit with my probation officer. And addicts and alcoholics are always good with their timing, right? So I hid the drugs in the closet, and I laid down to go to bed because the probation officer was going to be there at 7 in the morning, and the drugs started calling my name. So I took one, went and laid down, and I thought, well, that's a waste. You know, what's one going to do? So I went and I took another one. And I thought, well, you know, that's not really going to do that much. By midnight that night, I had taken a whole handful of amphetamines, and I lay there bug-eyed, looking at the clock as it spun around, thinking, oh my God, my probation officer is going to be here in a few hours. I'm stoned, and I could go to jail. I mean, it's not fun. He's not kidding. This isn't fun anymore. Not that it was ever fun, but it was more fun than what I had before I started drinking. Well, this wasn't more fun than what I had before I started drinking, and the thought of going to jail for 5 years wasn't fun. And I made it through that meeting with my probation officer the next morning, and thank God he didn't pull a urinalysis check on me. But after he left, I talked to a higher power for the first time in 12 years. I remember turning my back on this higher power when I was 12 years old, thinking if there is a God, he doesn't care about me, and if this is his idea of love, I don't want it. I'll just handle things myself. Well, handling things myself had landed me in a state hospital in a cottage for addicts. So I said a quick prayer. I looked up I don't know why we always look up, but I looked up and I thought, you know, God, if you're there and you care, and there's a program that will help me get sober, please help me find it. And when the woman was reading the traditions this morning, and when the steps were read earlier, I can remember how in treatment, when people used to come in and give these meetings, I'd, jar the person next to me and say, listen to that crock. It is a crock. And then I realized 3 days later, when I was sitting out on the lawn smoking a joint, that this is what the first step meant. I was powerless over alcohol and drugs, and my life had become unmanageable. I wasn't controlling the drugs, they were controlling me. The second step came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I had a counselor who really cared about me. She cared about me enough, in fact, because I was in a treatment center where no one had ever gotten straight before. I wasn't in Hazelton or a fancy one. She cared enough about me to bring in a heroin addict that had gotten sober. And all it took was seeing that one person could do it, one other human being could do it. And I came to believe. And I'm still coming to believe. And that's one of the reasons I came this morning, was to save my life and to continue to believe that a power greater than myself could continue restoring me to sanity. So I was out on the lawn smoking a joint, and I took one hit, and I was going to look at the clouds, the way we do. But what we're really doing is getting stoned. And I looked up, and all of a sudden, the whole world took on this purplish tone, and I realized that God was real, and that I had no right to continue doing to my body what I had been doing, and that if I put just half the energy into doing the right thing that I had put into doing the wrong thing, that there was very little in this world I couldn't do. So I took one more hit off the joint, and I went back into the building, and I threw myself into this program with all the energy and the zest and enthusiasm that I had thrown myself into getting and staying high. I had one slip in treatment, and that was on Halloween. They were having a party, and I thought I could go, and they passed the bottle around, and it was instinctive. My arm took the bottle, and it went right to my mouth. But something had already changed, because this program is a powerful thing, and it had changed me. And for the first time in my life, I felt guilty about using. That was unheard of for me. And something else unheard of happened, and that's that I went into group and I told the truth about what had happened, even knowing that I could go to jail for 5 years, because guilt does kill. It kills our soul, it kills our spirit. So after 8 months, I get out of treatment. I moved back to the Twin Cities. After a while, I get married. I married a man that was like one of the premier drug counselors in the state. He was in the papers all the time. The only thing that they left out was that he wasn't really sober. I went to school, and I waited the 2 years, and I went to my meetings, And the dreams changed from dreams, nightmares of using, to my nightmare would be I couldn't find an AA meeting to go to. I mean, change was truly happening in me. I had, carried my amends list around with me for 2 years till I realized that it didn't say, continue to feel guilty about it. It meant truly making amends to people and getting the good feeling that came from that. The feeling that I could walk down any street, run into any human being, and not have to run or hold my head in shame because I had taken care of myself with that person. So I get married. I got pregnant within the first month I was married. And shortly after my daughter Nicole was born, my son Shane came along next. And I knew something was wrong in my marriage, but I didn't know what because I had never seen a good working relationship in my whole life. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what it felt like. And my husband kept saying it was me, and I had so much guilt still that I thought it was me too. And I like to say, eventually I did go to work in the field, the chemical dependency field. And I wanted to be a counselor that worked with the addicts, the real people with the real problem, with the alcoholics and addicts. They said, no, you're going to work with the spouses. I said, oh. I said, well, why do I get that job? I said, I'm new here. They said, that's why you get it. I said, I don't know what to do with them. They said, neither do we. And so they threw me into the clutches of all these women that stood by their man no matter what. And I say women because it was primarily a male program, and the spouses were generally women. And I saw them, the kind that would rub their hands together and say, well, I'll do anything I can to help. And then the other ones that would try and get their husband out of treatment the minute he began to change and get sober. And then the ones that were so angry that if you tried to talk about feelings, there wasn't enough time. And it was anger and anger and anger and more anger. And I didn't know what to do with these women. And I like to say that with all my personal and professional knowledge of chemical dependency, it took me 7 short years to learn that I had married a practicing alcoholic. And I made a decision then that if I ever learned what to do about what had happened to me, because by then I was also writing part-time too. I had remembered a dream I had had, and that was to be a writer. And that if I ever figured out how to get over the pain I was in, I would write a book about it. I had a neighbor that kept pestering me to go to Al-Anon. And I know this is an AA meeting, and sometimes Al-Anon is a bad word in here. It was a bad word to me. It left a bad taste in my mouth. I thought that Al-Anon was like a ladies' aid society, and something for the little woman to do while the real person with the real problem went about getting help. And I just said, no, why should I go? He has the problem. But finally, like most other people, I went because I had nowhere else to go. There was nowhere else that would have me. Even my neighbor, my friend, wouldn't listen to me anymore. Go on and on. And for the second time in my life, I was handed more gifts. I was handed the gifts of the 12 steps again, only from a little bit different vision to work my way through what I was going through. I am powerless over alcohol, even though it's alcohol's effect on another human being, and my life has become unmanageable, and came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And then the surrender steps, the hard ones. Giving up, trading my will for a higher power's will. And that the real hard part about that is trusting the higher power that I turned my will over to, because I had never been able to trust anyone, and basically still can't. I can trust this program. I can trust the steps. They will always work. They will always do the same thing for me today that they did 30, 20, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 5 minutes ago. The steps always work. Always. And the promises in the big book are truly promises that are kept if we work the steps. So what happens? I began to write the book about the answers I found, and I find myself writing, you don't have to stay in relationships that make you miserable. And I realized, So I went upstairs and I told my husband, it's time for us to get a divorce. And he was reading the newspaper and he said, whatever you say, dear. So I went out and I found an apartment and I turned on all the utilities and I got a rental trailer and I loaded it with half of the furniture, and when he came home from work or wherever he had been that day, I said, get in the car, follow me. And he said, where we're going? I say, well, you live there now. You don't live here. We're getting a divorce. And when you come to visit the children, don't take your shoes off, don't take your jacket off, because you're not going to sleep there. You're visiting the children. And it was hard, and it was scary, because I was afraid to be alone. I was scared to death to be alone and not have someone to lean on. But gradually, and in change is consistent. It's the one thing that's been consistent. I became comfortable being alone. I became comfortable trusting a higher power, not to take care of problems that would happen in 2 weeks, not to take care of problems that would happen 3 months from now that I didn't even know existed yet, but to help me with what I needed right now, this moment in time. Grace is like breathing. We can't get ahead of ourselves. We can't do breathing today for next week or next month. We can only do breathing for right now. And grace is like that. We only get grace for where we are and what we're going through right now. So things started to get better, and we had been, I don't know, I didn't have problems with money when I was an addict, but when I was married to an alcoholic, I sure did have a lot of problems with money. I mean, he had driven us into the ground financially, and things began to get better, and the book I wrote began to sell. I was writing for the daily newspaper by then. One of the books I wrote hit the New York Times bestseller list. For the first time, I had enough money to buy my children new clothes and to go on vacations, and life had really changed. And I thought, good, this is what sobriety is about. And so that Christmas came, and it was the best Christmas I'd ever had. I bought the most beautiful Christmas tree I could find at the store. I bought the kids their presents. We went to candlelight service that night. I was sober. My children were happy. Life couldn't get much better than that. 1 month later, my son went skiing. It was his birthday, and my daughter took him skiing for her birthday gift to him, and we lived 5 minutes from the slopes. And I got a call, and the phone call said, we don't want you to worry, but your son hit his head. 10 minutes later, they called me back, and they said, can you meet us at the hospital? When I walked up to the door of the emergency room, there was a nurse waiting for me. And she just looked at me, and she said, do you have someone you can call? And so I was on to my next lesson, and I started to learn about death. My 12-year-old son died from his brainstem came loose. And I spent the next 10 years in probably the darkest place I had ever been in my life. But gradually and very slowly, I began to learn that there are some things we can only see in the dark. I remember that when I was in the ICU with my son, one of the nurses came up to me and she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, it's going to take about 8 years. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever been through, but you're going to get through this. And I thought, get your hand off me. I don't want to get through this.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
It was about 1998, and I was out at the drop zone. By then I was skydiving. And one of the women had lost her son. He was 35 years old, and he was a Hollywood stunt man. He jumped at that drop zone, but he had been up on a stepladder changing a light bulb, fell off, knocked his brainstem loose, and died. And I could recognize where she was at, and I walked over to her, not thinking, and I put my hand on her shoulder, and I said, "This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever been through. It's going to take about 8 years, but don't worry, you're going to get through it." And I realized that although I would never be over it, I had learned to live with it. And life does go on. Our choice is, how are we going to handle it? And I don't even know how much choice we have. Grace continues to play a key part in my life. I could talk about all the other problems and all the other good things that have happened since then. As an addict and alcoholic, I do tend to focus on the negative, and that's why gratitude is so important to me. It's important to be grateful for the good and grateful for the bad. I don't have to be grateful my son died, but I can be grateful for how I felt about it. I can be grateful for the 12 years I had with him. I can be grateful that I didn't use, although I wanted to, very, very badly, the week of his funeral. There's always something I can look around and feel grateful for. And worst case scenario, I can be grateful for the bad things, because it takes all the colors to make a picture, not just the happy colors. And it takes all the incidents that we go through to make a life. We need people that can walk up to someone and say, "This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever been through, but you will get through it. I know, because my son died too." I'm running out of time pretty soon here. About 3 months ago, I'm switching from books. I now have 18 books out, and would rather slit my wrists and write another one. I'm a big believer in setting goals, because it's like getting in a car. A lot of people say the way to make God laugh is tell him what your plans are. Well, a lot of times our plans don't go through as we change, but in another sense, we don't get in our car without a sense of where we're going. Now, we might end up somewhere else, but at least we're heading in some direction. And one of my goals was to write screenplays, so I've been studying classes in that. And over the last 10 years, I had to go to Germany for a surgery and have 2 discs in my back that were completely gone, replaced with artificial discs. I had to go to bed for a year following that. As soon as I was allowed out of bed, something told me that's something that we learn to listen to after we've been in the program for a while, and we realize we can trust ourselves, unless that self says, "Go get drunk." And I went up to Mora, Minnesota, and I discovered that my mother, who had Alzheimer's, was being abused by a granddaughter who had taken control of her money. She was being fed only 5 meals a week. And I didn't recognize her. She hadn't had a bath in 6 months. And in 1 second, all the anger and all the hatred and all the resentments of a lifetime dropped away. And I started legal action, and I started the process of flying back to Minnesota once or twice a month and taking care of my mother until her death. And by the time she died, I had truly fallen in love with this woman. And I learned another secret about life, that where we put our energy is where we end up loving and being bonded. That's why it's so important to come to these meetings, to take commitments, even if it's to clean up after the meeting. Put our energy into it, because we will learn to love where we give. And I did. I truly loved my mother right before she died. Just got done with that, got back home, started to work on a screenplay, got it done, had a lot of strong interest in it, and then I discovered that there was something a little funny with my bank account. And after some research, I discovered that the woman I had grown to love like a sister, that worked for me for 8 years, had embezzled almost $500,000 from me. So I've spent the last 3 months going through thousands and thousands of pieces of paper. And it will be the first time I have ever taken steps that will lead to somebody else going to jail, it's a really hard thing for me to do because it gives up the code that I learned as an addict and alcoholic, that you never turn anyone in. It really is the final step onto the other side. I also know that I need to forgive her, that it can't be done in anger, but just I have to do it. If for no other reason, then I'm going to get into a lot of trouble with the IRS if I don't, because she took checks that were never mentioned on my income tax returns, and that will catch up to me at some point. I've learned that living a day at a time doesn't mean holding my breath all day waiting for tomorrow. That living a day at a time means trusting what's taking place today. It doesn't mean I have to like it, but it does mean I need to accept how I'm feeling and be grateful for that. I've learned that there, for the grace of God, go I, still. And I suppose there's still people pointing at me saying there, but for the grace of God, go I. And I've continued to know that the steps 1 through 12, if we take the slightest step towards them, if we even think about a step. I'm powerless over alcohol, drugs, people, places, and things, and my life has become unmanageable. That it will lead to the next step, because in the end, we don't work the steps. The steps work us. They get us up to the front of these meetings, taking a cake, saying thank you. And thank all of you for helping me save my own life.
Any questions?
What do I do?
Questions? You stay here, David.
I stay here?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I guess I get 3 questions.
3 or 4.
3. No, it's fair. All right.
Thank you so much, really. Maybe you've talked throughout your whole pitch about this, but a lot of things have happened to you, and how do you keep fear at bay? Is it the steps, is it everything you've just encompassed in the share you've had today? I mean, there have been some pretty fearful things in your life, passings, etc., everything, the assistant, the checks. What do you do when it comes to fear and so that you can go forward?
Okay, for those of you that didn't hear, this man just asked me how I kept fear at bay with all the things that had happened. I don't. Life still scares the shit out of me. What really helped me with that was skydiving, although I don't recommend it. It might not be for everyone. But the first time I stood at the door of that plane and knew I was going to jump out, I don't think I've ever been that scared in my life. For me, I've learned I don't run away or keep fear at bay. I walk through it, I acknowledge it, I live with it, and I do what I'm supposed to do anyway. Life is going to be life. And I've learned that I don't do good things because I think good things will happen to me, because bad things really do happen to people that do good things. I do good things, or try to, because that's the way I've chosen to live. That's who I've chosen to be. And by the grace of God, I do that. Yes?
You talk about trusting after your husband and your husband and all that. Have you found trust with other people?
This gentleman just asked me if I've learned to trust other people in life. Obviously, because I have an assistant that was able to steal for me. But I really thought I had everything tied up tightly. I mean, it wasn't stupidity. I had talked to the police about how to prevent embezzlement. I had taken steps. The statistics say that 88% of the people we encounter that can get close to our money will ultimately steal from us. That means 9 out of every 10 people we meet are going to betray us. It's not about us. It's just about the way things are. I think the key is that I can always, like I said, trust myself, I can trust my higher power, and I can trust these steps. Yes?
Yeah, I was wondering what part your father played in your life, and how was there anything that you did to make amends to him before?
Okay, this gentleman asked me what the part my father played in my life, and if I had made amends to him. What father? My dad left home when I was 3 years old, and all he said was, "Okay for you." And yet he left me gifts. He was a musician. He was extremely creative. I had his genes, and I learned that my dad died. All 3 of my ex-husbands died. You know, I used to think I couldn't live without all these people, and they're all dead, and I'm still living. But I realized at some point that it's pure physics, that if we don't love our ancestors, it's impossible to love ourselves, because their DNA is in us. And if we hate and resent them, we're going to be hating and resenting ourselves. For good and for worse, for better, for worse, we have their genetics in us. And until we make some kind of peace with them, we're not going to be at peace with ourselves. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. What's been your experience with sponsorship? Have you learned how to trust sponsors or a sponsor? And how has that played a part in your...
I had a fantastic sponsor until about, oh, I'm sorry. The question was, what about sponsorship? What have I learned about that? And about trust. Again, it gets back to trusting myself. I had one sponsor in LA. I asked her to be my sponsor. And then she said, well, come and pick me up at X hours next week and take me out to dinner. We went out to dinner. And she said, all right, now I want you to give me $90. At that point, I thought this woman was out of her fucking mind. And she was. So again, it gets back to trusting ourselves. So many people feel guilty when they need to fire a sponsor, and sometimes it's time. Sponsorship is very important, though. It's very important to give it. It's very important to have one. It's harder for me now because I've achieved some degree of public figureness, and people tend to put personalities before principles with me, and I'm not okay with that. So it's hard for me to sponsor people without breaking a tradition, I feel. Again, it gets back to trusting myself. When is that taking place? And how can I best be of service and work the 12th step at this point in my life? Any other questions? Yes?
You have a life of alcoholism and drug dependency. How would you address people who have drug issues?
Well, this man just asked me that I have drug issues and alcoholism. At some point, I learned that for me anyway, they were in the same pot. It was using a drug that was getting me high, altering how I felt. Well, the other day, a person asked me, are you trying to quit smoking? And I said, no, I'm trying to smoke. It's getting very hard. I don't include tobacco with that, although a lot of people do. That's an individual choice. I'm at these meetings to not use drugs and to not drink. And when I first got into AA, it was a real taboo to even mention that you were an addict. And I found out that it actually was helpful just to say I was an alcoholic, because I was an alcoholic. I had began drinking before I started using drugs. By the time I finished, I could drink one beer and have a blackout. So I was very much an alcoholic and an addict. And I just always, in my own mind, I didn't have to say it out loud, but I could quietly think, I'm powerless over alcohol and drugs, and my life has become unmanageable. I didn't have to make an issue of it. I didn't have to fight with anyone over it if it was a meeting where it wasn't okay to say that. But I could think it and I could know it. And I think we're each capable of knowing what's right for us and what isn't right for us. We're at the last question now. Are there any last questions? All right. That one.
Thank you very much. In all your adversity, in your moments of joy, have you ever felt like guilt for the joy?
Okay, this gentleman just asked me if I've ever felt guilt for the joy. You know, in the beginning, it was like, oh, if I feel happy, the other shoe will drop. Well, you know, if you're with someone and they've got 2 feet and you've only heard one shoe drop, the other shoe is going to drop. On a serious level, I've learned that life is very cyclical, and that it's not a day at a time, it's a moment at a time. And I've learned more and more the importance of living a moment at a time. And if a moment brings joy, I accept that. If the next moment brings pain, hurt, anger, betrayal, it brings that. And I just have to sink into my life, whatever that may be. And that goes back to steps 3 and 11. There is not one problem in this world, newcomers, old-timers, that can't be solved by the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious. Do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.